you take a few moments to why don't you take a few moments to explain exactly what that means, Chief of Business and Legal Affairs, and then if you might also tell us what was your path to getting to your current position.
Sure. Chief of Business and Legal Affairs at USA Track and Field encompasses everything from sponsorships, licensing, litigation, risk management, media rights deals, governance, monitoring our agent program, overseeing our Safe Sport program, all of our IP. Basically, a corporate generalist who also oversees a lot of the different business initiatives that we pursue as an organization. And so kind of wear multiple hats on a regular basis, called in to address whatever the hot issues are for the day. And in terms of journey, I'm sure you can elaborate on some of that as well, because it seems like yesterday when I was, coming out of law school, trying to break into the sports and entertainment industry, sitting in your offices at Fox, talking to you about doing that. And my journey started out, I'm a Pepperdine Law graduate, so I was in Southern California. While I was in law school, I realized that sports was really the area that I wanted to pursue. And I'm kind of the sports business junkie trapped in a legal body. Went out and I was with the soccer before it became MLS. And then I was one of their first, if not the first intern at Major League Soccer when they were still in Century City. Did everything that I could there, was one of those in early, out late people, stuck around for the last 2 years of law school while I was there. When I went to go take the bar, I knocked on the commissioner's office and was wondering what it would take to get a job with MLS and beyond. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. Did some private practice work, worked at a Hollywood talent agency called Writers and Artists. They were later bought out by Paradigm. Did corporate general work at a publicly traded company called The Finish Line, and then met back up with that same commissioner who was at that point the CEO of USA Track and Field in Indianapolis, where he was talking about wanting to make a change. And so things just kind of worked out. It enabled me to get back into the, more integrated in sports and entertainment. And here I am, like 12 years later.
Well, it's a good path, but again, the concept of my theory of no blinders is you wanted one path, but you knew sports and you found other ways, which I think probably, especially on the commercial side with Finish Line, that probably was a big help with a lot of what you do now is, on the commercial side of USATF.
Absolutely. It was literally like the boot camp for being an in-house corporate generalist, where you're learning about e-commerce and IT agreements and real estate agreements that you use for facilities and, all these other things. So the sponsorship agreements, the IP monitoring, labor and employment, all of those areas that you're touched upon as a in-house or a GC lawyer. And so that was really an opportunity to go. It was a publicly traded company, so there were a lot of issues that you're encountering at different, levels of the business. And so, and it was like fortunate. It was one of those hires where they were looking to add people in their legal department to help them integrate with the business side. And so, as I mentioned earlier, as someone who really is more interested in the business side of sports, to get in and really learn those verticals, I think was important, and I'd like to believe makes me more effective at what I do now.
Well, I think what you raise a really important point that we talk about often on this show, especially on the sports business side of it for us lawyers, is we are sometimes called upon to wear two hats, as it were. The lawyer hat is always firmly on our head because of ethical obligations and other considerations and concerns around being a lawyer. But the business side is a little different because now we get to act a little more entrepreneurial than just, can we do this? Is the agreement balanced? And that's what I think makes sports law more interesting, because it's not really a discrete legal discipline. It's sort of a cornucopia of everything within the legal world. And I assume you run across, there's no day where you're only doing one kind of issue, is there?
No, correct. You're 100% dead on with that. And, part of it too is, you start to understand, when you understand like where the business is going and what they're trying to accomplish, then you can, at least for me, internally break past that initial legal gut reaction of like, no, we can't do this, or that's not a good idea, to figuring out a way of saying like, I hear what you're trying to do. I think this might be the best path. You can still accomplish what you're trying to do, but we just got to deviate the plan slightly in order to mitigate risk a little bit better. And that's generally, the best way to move forward.
So if there was a motto for you, it'd probably have to be issue spotting and problem solving.
That would be accurate.
But in your world, because it's not really, we don't really think of track and field, or athletics as it's called around the rest of the world.
Right.
We don't generally think of it as, with the league concept. It seems a lot more individual until you get around to Olympics, or which just finished up on Sunday, the World Athletics Competition here in the US in Oregon at Hayward Field, where the US team was really focused and did quite well. It was, all in all, I would say, a pretty powerful 10-day competition. And because of the results of it, and because US athletes did so well, and I'd say it was a high watermark for medals won this last competition for the USA.
It was historic. It was our highest medal output ever. And again, first time the champs are held on US soil, and the team showed up and they really, exhibited who they are as people and as athletes. I mean, so many great personalities, so many stories about athletes overcoming adversity. It was just really, really exciting to see.
Well, it's great. And because of that success, you've already outlined so many things you do. And I'm thinking about particularly sponsorships and media deals. How does success for the US team, an event like this, how does that help you push those two initiatives forward?
Well, our leadership has been working really hard with the board, trying to put together a comprehensive strategic plan where, we're focused on elevating the profile of the sport. Ideally, we'd like to be the, fifth, at least as a guidepost here, the fifth most popular sport in the United States. And so, the goal is to take advantage of the momentum and the attention that has been garnered at the World Championships, and then use that as a launch pad that we have all the way through LA 28. That's also going to be the Olympics here in the United States in LA, to continue building programs, whether it's a domestic circuit or things that are going to help keep and maintain interest and help our athletes kind of transcend pop culture and become a little bit more known.
I know in other Olympic sports, we'll call them for lack of a more defined term, there is support from the national governing bodies for the athletes so that they don't have to be a used car salesman and figure out when they're going to train in the rest of their day. What about with you folks at USATF? What kind of programs do you have to help support the athletes? Because the training regimen that elite world-class athletes have to go through takes an extraordinary amount of time. And the more science is involved, the more detail and the more planning and the more support these athletes need. What kind of support are you available to provide to them?
Well, you're like spot on, Bobby. You did your homework there, right? So, I mean, you talk about the sports science and the things that we can do, again, to help them with training and education so that they are in the most advantageous position that they can be. we work for different ways to create funding for them so that they can focus on their training. And so it's really hard, obviously, in the sport, to try to sustain yourself on just, appearance fees or prize money or things like that. So the federation does what it can, and we can delve into a little bit of the funding, but like we really are committed towards supporting our athletes in every possible way so that they can focus on what they need to focus, which is medal attainment and fulfilling their Olympic and world championship aspirations.
So not surprising, we have first question, which I'll read to you. Does the stakeholder representation part of USATF governance interfere with the prudent management of commercial assets to gain revenue for greater aid to Olympians and to support grassroots track and field?
See, this is why I love SLA, because everybody's like spot on, right? So the governance is a big component of not just USA Track and Field, but a lot of the other governing bodies, right? Where you have volunteer leaders who have different roles throughout the organization, and want to give their perspectives and you know and lend their expertise. And then you have, you're trying to manage that within the governance system. And by far, it's been probably one of the biggest challenges that governing bodies face. CEOs typically report to, their board of directors. Their board of directors tend to be come from the volunteer ranks, so there is that dynamic that exists, which creates challenges. But again, credit to our senior leadership. They're doing what they need to do in order to try to work in tandem with their board. And that's usually been the secret sauce when CEOs and boards can work together under a common goal. It helps, work through some of the challenges that were, coming up in these types of situations.
Speaking of challenges, I'm just curious, this was the World Athletics Competition on USA soil. So is this a USADA or a WADA? Who's running the testing here, and how do those two entities work together?
Again, so WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency, right? And then World Athletics, which is our international federation, they have the Athletics Integrity Unit, right? Which also works to monitor clean sport within our sport. So, they work together. Obviously, there's different athletes coming from all different parts of the world to compete there. So, they're kind of working in tandem with respect to testing in competition. There's also out of competition testing, which takes place as well. Again, the AIU, the Athletics Integrity Unit, they're generally focused on the really, really top echelon of the sport, whereas USADA has more breadth within their registered testing pool, or RTP, and they tend to go deeper amongst the ranks of US athletes. And they, to their credit, they're one of the top national anti-doping organizations, or NADOs, out there. And so they do a really good job, which is a concern that our athletes express, because USADA does test them on a quite frequent basis in accordance with the WADA code. And then you overlay the AIU and their testing, because a lot of our athletes, thank goodness, are ranked highly in the world. And so our athletes do feel like they are getting tested far, far more than some of their peers, which has been a concern that we have been trying to make sure it gets addressed in a more equitable manner.
And within the sport, because it's unlike the sort of top four that you're trying to get right behind in sports in America, there is no union, no collective bargaining unit. But what's the interface between the athletes and USATF? Do they have a communal, as it were, voice, or is this just committees of athletes reaching out saying, hey, can you do better for us in this? Why can't we get that? How does that work?
Well, I mean, as you know, the USOPC has been working to integrate the athlete voice, much more strongly throughout the movement. And each national governing body has an athletes advisory committee, or AAC, right, that represents the voice of the athletes. Our athletes, have also at different points in history worked with other athletes across the globe to try to unionize in that sense. But to your point, I mean, most governing bodies, the labor dynamic in a CBA doesn't exist because the governing bodies are putting out, indoor championships or outdoor championships, and it's not a league where those types of dynamics would come into effect.
And obviously, there's been a huge change since the Ted Stevens Amateur Athlete Act was passed. And obviously, concept of amateurism has slid away to some extent in terms of the ability of athletes to earn money. But there are obviously collegiate athletes that are participating in the world championships, competing in other meets. And now, in 1 year and 26 days into the world of NIL, there are athletes able to earn money. Is there any issues that exist between the NIL monies and what's allowed under USA Track and Field?
I don't know that there would be in that sense in terms of issues. I mean, the landscape is evolving and it's creating more opportunities, I think, for collegiate athletes. I mean, we have been in a situation where, as things are changing at the NCAA and within universities, I mean, money is drying up for some of the programs that struggle to generate revenue. And so that has been an issue that we have been very concerned about over the past couple of years to ensure that, sports like track and field are getting funded because of the importance of collegiate programs, developing athletes in those environments. And so we've had, active lobbying roles in that sense to try to make sure that, we are doing everything that we can to continue to cultivate the pipeline for the sport. But, NIL is creating opportunities for athletes to support themselves, which is a good element to overlay on these issues.
Well, let's talk about pathways for a second, because you always want to figure out what the pool is that leads up to the folks that are going to be on the Olympic team in 2024 in Paris. Obviously, that's sort of, you're a track and field athlete, you're always looking to world championships, to Olympic games. That's always sort of been what appears to be the path. But I think a big feeder, undeniably, in the US certainly, has been college athletics and college track and field programs. We're now in a situation where we've had some big changes in the college space. And most recently, our beloved Pac-12 is suddenly about to become a Pac-10, could be a Pac-8, could be a Pac-nothing. And the loss of those media dollars is a big issue, certainly here in California, between UCLA leaving and the regents on the impact on the University of California, the University of California.
Yeah, when those satellite schools break away, how does that work?
So right? We're now in a situation where that loss of the income that's been built up potentially impacts and impairs those collegiate pathways. Are you folks looking into this? Are you thinking, how are we going to help keep these programs alive? Because I don't know if it's a Chicken Little, the sky is falling scenario, but clearly the potential for money drying up at colleges around the country as you're creating these super conferences becomes a very real issue. And how are you going to protect those pathways?
It certainly is. I mean, I think the other element that I want to fold into that discussion, right, is our high performance team. They run a very analytical, they're looking at, different disciplines, different marks. They have statistics that say, if you don't, if you're not top whatever in this particular discipline by this particular age, then our statistics show that the likelihood of that individual becoming, medal worthy, drop off. So we're constantly looking at, who's attaining what marks, and focusing in on those athletes and trying to do what we can to do that. So to your point, yes, I mean, this is why, I mentioned before that we have been monitoring that situation closely because of the impact of it. Obviously, I mean, part of the beauty of track and field or athletics, right, is it's a very grassroots sport. I mean, a lot of people, consider themselves athletes, the weekend warriors, the marathoners, like a lot of people are engaged in running, and, identifying those. Part of the issues, again, quite candidly, that we dealt with earlier in, within my 12-year history is like what constitutes a professional, athletics athlete, right? That's difficult to draw depending on the discipline and stuff like that. And so again, we're looking at different ways to continue to identify and support, and the NCAA definitely plays a role in that.
Now, you mentioned earlier sort of the balance between regulatory and compliance, the sort of general concepts that you're dealing with. Can you give us sort of of how that works on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it was something we were talking about, I think, before we went live, right? But I was talking to you about how I do feel that within the Olympic sports now, and even the USOPC, there's really been a shift in terms of um, the Olympic movement becoming more regulatory with the advent of the U.S. Center for Safe Sport and the audits that they do on the governing bodies to ensure safe sport compliance and compliance with the revisions to the act. And then we've got our insurance, like the insurance marketplace for governing bodies is becoming more and more challenging with concussion and the long tails that some of these statute of limitation type issues for sexual misconduct can have. And so that's creating issues. So underwriters tend to be more involved in terms of monitoring and compliance and wanting to know what the policies, procedures, and then seeing them in effect. The U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, they do auditing, and this is all on top of the what would typically be the audits that were done by the USOPC as it pertains to just general, funding allocations and things like that, in addition to the auditing that you have to do for your auditors. I mean, we do spend quite a bit of time on this type of compliance thing, much more so than we were in the prior years, like since the last couple of years.
And another entity that you mentioned, I think I'm not sure if it comes under regulatory or compliance, but safe sport. And how does that work in and by and large help protect the athletes?
Well, I mean, from a USATF perspective, I mean, we've embraced the whole safe sport concepts, and we had things in effect before the center came in, but we've really been outspoken about trying to make sure that we create the proper culture, not just in policies and procedures, but actually implemented, educating our athletes, our coaches, our officials, our local organizing committees, everybody putting on events to make sure that they have some of the same sensitivities to try to put light in dark corners and not allow some of the issues that have been plaguing uh, Olympic and amateur sports over the past several years that make negative headlines for the governing bodies. And so we've been trying to be as proactive on that front as we can be. We work closely with the center. We work closely with the USOPC. We work closely with outside consultants that can help us in these areas to make sure that as best as we can, we're trying to make sure that we don't have blind spots in those areas, so that we are, as close to best practices in those areas as we can be, and as close to cutting edge, in fact, as we can be.
Speaking of big issues in sports, and I don't want to put you on put you in an awkward spot. But obviously it's difficult to talk about sports competitions, swimming, track and field, etc., without having to address the big issue around transgender athletes. And I'm not sure, I don't know whether USATF has made a statement, is involved in research, but it seems to be an issue that has to have come across your desk, on the regular, if not with an athlete saying, I want to compete, at least from a regulatory standard of who can compete.
Yeah, how much time do we have left, Bobby?
Well,
I'm
gonna have a guest in a
right?
couple of weeks, and we're gonna dig deep. But obviously, this has to be something that is, pretty hot topic in your offices.
Definitely a hot topic. We're, I don't know if you want to say fortunate, but our international federation, World Athletics, they were one of the first international federations to put out policies on it specific to the sport. So their policies are backed by science, and they are looking at how that should evolve in light of some of the issues that are coming up. I've been fortunate to be selected to their governance commission, so I get to be involved in those things. But there are a lot of challenges with those types of issues, as I'm sure all of our viewers here, as well as yourself, are all well aware of. So it's a delicate situation. Um, Science, I think, is important, and understanding what the international federation and member federations are tasked with doing, like what is our mission, and those are guiding principles for how you try to address some of those issues. And so it's an evolving discussion, and we're working through it one glorious day at a time.
Well, let's see. So I think in summation, your job involves finance, science, law, regulations, compliance, litigation. I think do you have time to sleep, or because you're juggling a lot of issues, my friend?
Yeah, it's one of those things where you feel like, what is it, the jack of all trades but master of none. I feel like I can survive the 2-minute discussion on the topic, but if we're gonna get really deep into the 20-minute discussion, then I'm gonna have to call in a little backup or really dig down on some of those things. But yeah, it's a lot of things. It's a challenging environment, but it's also one of the things that makes the role exciting. And so, you'd never want to understate that.
Like I said earlier, issue spotting and problem solving. Norm Wain at the helm. Well, look, Norm, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to spend a little time with us and talk to us about your job and what you're doing and the issues that are facing you. Also, for those listening in, Norm also runs our outreach program through SLA. So if you want to have an event in your area, feel free to reach out to him. We're back to having live events, which I hope, all things being equal, we continue to do and move away from some of this virtual stuff. So, Norm, again, thank you so much for being here. And for those of you listening, if you're not a member of the Sports Lawyers Association, go to sportslaw.org. Up on the top, membership, click it and become a member. Norm, all my best. Thank you
Thank you
again for
so
taking
much,
the
Bobby.
time.
Really appreciate it.
Really loved having you. So see everybody in 2 weeks, and stay tuned for our next guest for episode 40 of Sports Shorts. Have a good night, everyone.